Hello there. I see a few people already waiting for the stream to start. We will kick it off in about 10 minutes. While we're waiting, if someone could please confirm in the Twitch chat that the audio volume is good. Can you hear and understand me well? Awesome. I see confirmations. Another question, I wanted to fix this from last time. Only after the stream I noticed that the resolution was pretty low. Can you please check that you can watch the stream in 1080p? Awesome. Thank you so much, Shanato. In that case, I will mute myself for the next few minutes and we will start in 8 minutes or so. It's good to see you, Luca. Hi, Magnus. I don't have a green screen here. I'm just stashed in a small a room in the Paradox offices, and this one doesn't really have a proper streaming setup. But maybe for the next series when we get to the late Cretaceous eventually. Hey, Trinex, it's good to see you. While we are waiting, if the Twitch chat wants to, you can tell me what your favorite dinosaurs are, so I can judge it. So I can judge it harshly. Okay, I see Ankylosaurus. Look and I will have Ankylosaurian dinosaurs today, so we'll talk a little bit about them. And Shinato, a safe answer, but a good one. Every dinosaur from Power Rangers. Hello, DJ. It's good to see you in the chat. I'm actually thinking, will we have any of the Power Rangers dinosaurs in those streams? I feel like they're all late Cretaceous animals, so I don't think so. But we will have some really cool ones instead. I see we have Trans in the Twitch chat. Hey, Gabe. It's good to see you there. Okay, we're 4 minutes away from the start of the stream. I know that at the Stockholm office, at Paradox, I think there's going to be a TV set up in the mess hall for the stream. So if we have anyone watching there, if they could confirm that it's all set up and working, I would appreciate it. I see there is a bit of dino hype in the chat. I can confirm dinosaurs are going to be a big subject today, but not only. I am trying to show you also some other animals that lived alongside them. Some big, some small. It is indeed. It is time. Well, almost time. Right? That was false advertising. Never mind, ignore me. It's 2.5 minutes. Let's give everyone time to trickle in. I hope you all like big meat-eating dinosaurs because about 50 slides at the start of today's presentation is just about them. Today's stream is basically the dream of me when I was 12 years old. Okay, 2 minutes till we start. Grab a coffee and a snack, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, everyone, I think it's time to get this started. Let's not waste any more time because today's presentation is a little longer than the last one. So, we are back in the early Cretaceous. And before we go into all the details and all the cool stuff that we have prepared today, I do want to talk very briefly about the title of this presentation. It's called Renewal. And the reason why I called it like this is because unlike the presentation we had 2 weeks, where we are exploring the slice of time where the fossil record was really, really poor, and you saw this reflected in the fact that there were basically no big meat-eating dinosaurs to show you, and a lack of examples of dinosaurs from some other groups. Now we are past this period. The times we'll explore today is a lot better. Still not great, but we are getting more fossils and a lot more detail to look at when trying to decipher how the life of this era looked like. So, sorry, let me just, there we go. Now clicking works. So to give you a context of where we are landing today in time, we're still in the Cretaceous period. In its first half, that is going to be the focus of those streams. And today, if you look at the bottom, we have this division into so-called ages. So the lower Cretaceous, that you can see here, is divided into ages. 2 weeks ago, we talked about Berriasian and Valanginian, so this time period when we have very few fossils. And today, we'll talk about a relatively shorter period called Hauterivian and Barremian. Those are the two stages. What we will not do is we will not go through them in a chronological order. Because we are talking about a shorter slice of time, I will talk about them as if they are one whole. So we will not be talking about which dinosaurs lived in the first one, which in the second one. Instead, we'll take a more general approach today. So let's get started. I believe that after the last presentation, I promised you a lot more meat-eating dinosaurs. And we will start that with Concavenator. The art you see here is by one of my favorite artists. You'll be hearing his name a lot in those streams. His name is Mark Witten. And Concavenator is a medium-sized predator. You can see here a comparison to a human. There's a silhouette on the right that lived in the early Cretaceous. And I am certain that what is catching your attention is this thing, this weird crest on its back. So let's talk about it a little bit. Concavenator's full name means the hunchback hunter from Cuenca? Okay, never mind. It's a hunchback hunter. And there are two features that I would like to focus on. First is the crest. You can see it outlined in the yellow. There are some ideas of what it could have been used for. One, and this is quite often the idea when it comes to dinosaurs having some weird things that don't make sense initially, is that it was probably used for display, maybe mating behavior, maybe an intimidation tool for the animal. But the second option is that it could have also been used for thermal regulation. It could have helped the animal radiate and capture heat. The thing to know about dinosaurs was that they were able to regulate their own body temperature, not like lizards, for example, but they were not as good at it as the mammals were. So sometimes it's possible they had some additional features in their anatomy, like this crest, that could have helped them with that. Another interpretation of it is that this has not been a crest at all, because there is just a bone there, and we can't really interpret what kind of flesh was surrounding it. It might have been a hump, right? It might have used it to store energy the way camels do nowadays. We can't know for sure. The other interesting feature are the arm quills. For the record, in the fossil, we don't really see the quills themselves. What we see are small holes in the shoulder bones that are speculated to have hosted either quills or actual feathers. The thing we need to know about those big meat-eating dinosaurs is that, yes, they were feathered, but not the same way as birds are today. The feathers, they were covered with, let's call them more primitive. That's what they were. They were not developed to be flight feathers. However, if those quills were actual feathers, then it's possible that true feathers actually emerge in way more groups of dinosaurs, and Concavenator might have been one of them. I call them flight feathers, but of course this animal would not have flown if it had them. They might have been used also for display, for example. On this picture, so one thing I want to clarify with Concavenator is that this crest is a very uncommon feature. Very few dinosaurs of this group have them. But one possible dinosaur that could have had it also was Altis pinax. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is because you actually possibly saw Altis pinax 2 weeks ago, we talked about those very partial fossils that scientists had trouble classifying and identifying what they are. And the bone you see here is all we have of this Spinax. And it is speculated, with some doubt, because again, we have very little of the animal, that it might have been a close relative of Concavenator, and it might have looked a little bit like this, only it would have lived before Concavenator itself. Another bigger meat-eater, they're also not huge at this point, is an animal called Neovenator, and it's actually a close relative of Concavenator. What you see here is that, one, this is not as big of a predator as Tyrannosaurus rex, for example. You see that the arms are bigger, they have 3 fingers, while the T-Rex had 2. It has those weird ridges at the top of its head. This is because those theropods, those big meat-eating dinosaurs, are actually not close relatives of Tyrannosaurus rex. They're a separate evolutionary branch, and we'll talk about them in just a moment in more detail. This is another picture of Neovenator, so it's the same animal, just from a different artist. You can see it wading in shallow waters in forest and eating something that I will not tell you what this is just yet. We'll get to it later in the presentation, but take a moment to take in the art because I think it is amazing. I think this is by the artist R.J. Palmer, but I'm not quite sure. I can't exactly remember. Another representations of the animal, again, seeing T-Rex in a lot of pop culture, we are used to the idea of big meat-eating dinosaurs having very small arms. This is not the case here, and as you will see, there are big theropods that have even bigger hands and arms. Let's take a moment to take a look at this family tree, because this is going to be really relevant today, especially this one. As a reminder, theropods are the 2-legged dinosaurs. Among them, we have the big meat-eating dinosaurs like T-Rex. We have the smaller raptors, a lot of other stuff, including birds also. And you can see that Neovenator lies here, and Concavenator on the branch right next to it. This whole group that you can see highlighted in yellow are called Allosaurids. And some of you might have heard about the animal called Allosaurus. It lived in the Jurassic, no longer in the Cretaceous. What is important to know about them is that this group are the apex predators in the early Cretaceous, not Tyrannosaurs. Tyrannosaurs' time to shine will come a little bit later, and in a few minutes we'll discuss why that is the case. One thing that is a very characteristic feature of this whole group are those bony ridges at the top of the head. All Allosauroids have them in some capacity, and I have no idea what they are used for. I don't know if they have any practical application. It's just a common feature that is present in all of them, and you would not find it in Tyrannosaurs. This subgroup specifically, called Carcharodontosaurs, which means shark-toothed lizards, is the subgroup that is specifically dominant in the early Cretaceous. So the apex of the food chain is represented in this red circle. Now, I told you about them, and I said that the Tyrannosaurs are not as strongly positioned at this time. So let's talk a little bit about them. So Tyrannosauroidea is a robust group. The T-Rex is on one of those branches, but there is a lot of other stuff here. And I would like to introduce you to 2 of them, the Proceratosaurids and Pantyrannosaurus. For the record, the evolution turns its gears very slowly in the early Cretaceous for the Tyrannosaurs. In this series, we will not move beyond those 2. The rest of this family tree emerges in the late Cretaceous, but the 2 that we have present here are very interesting on their own. So let's start with the top group, Proceratosaurs. Here you see their origins. This is how they looked like in the Middle Jurassic, so before the time that we are describing right now. Again, even though those are Tyrannosaurids, you can see that the arms are relatively sizable in relation to the body. Again, there are 3 fingers and not 2, and they have this weird crest on their nose, but no bony ridges, because again, those are not relatives of the Allosaurus. As for the period we are discussing today, so the early Cretaceous, specifically in the Hauterivian and Barremian that we are talking about right now, we have one representative of Proceratosaurus. This is Eutyrannus. Again, art by Mark Whitten. I think this one is worth looking at for a little longer because it represents something that we don't generally see in the pop culture, which is dinosaurs in winter. We are used to this old trope of dinosaurs living in hot tropical jungles and spending most of their time there. As you might remember from the last stream we did, early Cretaceous is the colder part of the Mesozoic. It is still warmer than today, but there is actual snow. There are actual winters at higher latitudes. And Eutyrannus lived fairly far up north in what would be today's, I think, northern China areas of Russia. So Eutyrannus is a fuzzy tyrannosauroid, and it is a fairly big one, which might be a little bit confusing because I just told you that those are not the apex predators. And generally, tyrannosauroids in the early Cretaceous are not big. And in fact, Eutyrannus is the last big tyrannosauroid. They're about to be completely outcompeted by Carcharodontosaurs. So a few pictures of Eutyrannus because I do think it's really cool. It's one of the dinosaurs where we suspect that because it lived at high altitudes where it was cold, it had actually a lot of feathers on it. So you can see a lot of artists represented specifically with a very thick feathery coating. Lots of different takes. I really like this one. And a little more impressionistic, like an early dawn or maybe, an Arctic daylight early on in the spring. In the middle of the winter in the northern hemisphere, and Eutyrannus would have been the apex predator there. And one more picture, it was the apex predator of its region, and you can see the dynamics between it and some other animals here. You might not see them at the first glance, but they are present. You can see some smaller dinosaurs hiding underneath tree logs, a small mammal standing in front of it, another one hiding in the burrow. This was the apex predator of the northern China, southeastern Russia territory in the early Cretaceous in this stage. Now, we talked about Eutyrannus and Proceratosaurids, but as you can see, this is a branch that doesn't really go anywhere, right? It's this part of the family tree of Tyrannosauroids that is going to lead eventually to T-Rex, which is going to be somewhere here. So let's talk about this group now, Pantyrannosauria. And while Eutyrannus is sizable, those are not. And this is the standard for Tyrannosauroids in the early Cretaceous. This is about the size that most of them have achieved. So Dilong, it's another Chinese Tyrannosauroid. And you can see here being, the size of a medium dog, I guess. Well, maybe a big dog, to be perfectly honest. Hunting small mammals, some rodents, birds, stuff like that. Eotyrannus, and again, I really like this art. Gabriel Gueto is the artist. Smaller, fuzzier Tyrannosauroid. Again, you see, even though this is the branch that is going to lead to the Tyrannosaurus rex, you can still see that the arms are sizable. There are still 3 fingers on them. You can also see that there is a lot of fuzzy covering. It's because even though Eotyrannus didn't live in an environment as cold as Eutyrannus, the feathers in those dinosaurs had a role of helping them maintain body temperature. And the smaller an animal is, in case of dinosaurs, the more of this insulation they need. The bigger they get, the better their body is at maintaining the heat. But because Tyrannosauroids of this time are generally small, a lot of them are fairly fuzzy, like Eotyrannus here. As you can see, also not a big one. You probably would still not want to meet one in a dark corner, but it's not the size of the T-Rex, and those will not be for a long time. 2 other takes on the animal here. On the left, another art by Mark Whitten. On the right, a sketch. I wish I could sketch like this. A sketch by Gabriel Ugueto. My head canon is that the one on the right is ready to fetch ball. And another sketch, and Gabriel Ugueto is the artist who really likes to flex the fact that he doesn't need Photoshop to make cool art, so he just takes pictures of his sketches done on paper with an actual freaking pen. Here is Eotyrannus, also present in an environment with other animals that lived alongside it. You can see a crocodile relative, not a true crocodile yet, some turtles, stuff like that. This was probably the choice of prey for it. This was the tyrannosauroids of this era were generally not the kind of animals that would go out and hunt other big dinosaurs, maybe some juveniles, but there was a lot of other prey available for them. The apex predators of the era, as we remember, were Carcharodontosaurs, and tyrannosauroids could not compete with them. So, now that you know that tyrannosauroids were here, they were the small ones, and I showed you some Carcharodontosaurs, I want to go a little bit forward in time and show you how an actual apex predator from the group of Carcharodontosaurs would have looked like. So, in this time, we have Concavenator, and if we moved just a few million years, we would have Acrocanthosaurus. And I want to use Acrocanthosaurus to illustrate what this group actually is and what it represents, because most of them will be roughly this size and will have roughly this body shape. So, let's talk about Carcharodontosaurs. Like I said, the name means shark-toothed lizards. Those are the big apex predators before tyrannosaurs. The tyrannosaurs are pushed into their own smaller opportunistic predator, maybe scavenger niche, and the top of the food chain is dominated by those animals. Those, as the name implied, actually have sharp teeth. This is the thing that I think sometimes media doesn't get right, which is they talk about a tyrannosaur and they use this descriptive term, which are knife-like teeth. Tyrannosaur teeth were not sharp. Their function was very different. You can see an example here below. They were fairly dull, but they were really big. When a tyrannosaur bit a prey, it was sort of a rip and tear maneuver, a Doom reference here, while Carcharodontosaur teeth, you can see the serration on the edge here, something that sharks have also. Those were actually sharp teeth. They could rip and tear, but they could also slice with those things. So the type of wound that was inflicted by the animal was quite different. What is interesting is that potentially, maybe, it is a little bit splitting hair because the differences are minimal. Some Carcharodontosaurs might have been bigger than the T-Rex. What you see here is an animal called Giganotosaurus, which is actually a late Cretaceous Carcharodontosaur. Hopefully we'll talk about it one day. And you can see a size comparison with a human here. The reason why I'm saying it's not exactly certain whether they were bigger is because we don't have many fossils of Giganotosaurus, and we have a ton of fossils of Tyrannosaurus rex. And because of that, it is difficult to estimate the average size of a Giganotosaurus. But splitting hair or not, they were at the very least as big as Tyrannosaurs would get eventually, only about 40 or 50 million years earlier. The other difference between them and Tyrannosaurs was how they grew. The thing to know about Tyrannosaurs is that they started very small, they experienced a sharp period of growth, and then they stopped growing again. In a way, Tyrannosaurs are similar to us in that sense. We also go through that. We grow slowly, we go through the maturity period, and then we slow our growth again. Carcharodontosaurs grew slower, longer, but this is one of the reasons why some scientists think that ultimately they would have ended up being bigger than Tyrannosaurs, because they would have kept growing their whole life. As far as the force of the neck and the jaw, they could probably bite and lift a piece of meat weighing about 400 kilograms, right? The arms that I see some comments about, yes, they are not big, and in general, among big meat-eating dinosaurs, they were never big, but they still had a use. They were not as small as Tyrannosaurus arms. Most likely when a Carcharodontosaur bit into the prey, it pulled it closer to itself, and it could use its arms to dig into the body of the prey and hold it closer to itself and prevent it from escaping. So this was about Carcharodontosaurs. Now you know that Tyrannosaurs are not the apex predators of this era, and there is a different top dog in the environment. And this is how it's going to stay for this whole series of presentations. But we are not done yet. There are still a few branches here that I want to explore. I see a question from Trinex. Why were carnivorous dinosaurs so tiny armed? Well, not all of them were, as you will see in a moment, but it's true for most of them. It's a difficult question to answer. I guess the use of the jaws was so robust that they didn't really need arms to inflict wounds on them. Like you can see that their heads are really massive, especially in the big dinosaurs. In some smaller theropods, the arms are a little bigger. So I guess it has something with how they adapt to hunting the prey, and at some level, when the body size gets really bigger, it's more advantageous to have a massive noggin with a big jaw rather than long arms. So let me tell you about this little branch hidden here now, since we are talking about arms. So this is a Fukuiraptor, and it seems pretty vanilla, and to be honest, at this stage it is. Again, it's not too big. It looks like just a standard dinosaur, and this is how it could have looked like with a modest feather coating. Again, not very big arms, but also not as small as T-Rex. We have a different one that, and I will not try to pronounce its name. The art here is by Joshua Knupe, a really nice artist, and we can see it here interacting with a different theropod. This is what those two animals will lead to. So by the late Cretaceous, this group will have developed massive front arms. So this is the exception to the rule. Megaraptors, and they are not the raptors as you know them from the Jurassic Park and all that, not just the name of this group, are the group of theropods that did not skip the arm day, right? So they have a use for those arms. You can see that the head is a little bit smaller than Carcharodontosaur and T-Rex, which again is this weird relationship between the size of the head and the size of the arms. Megaraptor doesn't live in the early Cretaceous. Those animals do. But this is the origin of this branch of the tree, and eventually this is where it's going to lead to. So we have Megaraptora present on the tree now. FYI, guys, there is a bit of a confusion as to which family of dinosaurs this group actually belongs to. There is one theory that they actually should lie in the Tyrannosauroidea as a very early group that diverged very early, so they could be actually tyrannosaurs with big arms. But it is a little bit uncertain. We need more fossil record. So we have Fuyang Venator here, and here we have this second animal that you saw in this picture. It's called Vioraptor. This group, as you can see, Pel, thank you. There was a lot of effort put into those goddamn diagrams, way more than I should have probably. So Vioraptor belongs to Coelurosaurs. And as you can see, Coelurosaurs are the common ancestors of Tyrannosaurs, and this group, which we'll talk about in a moment. A different picture of Vioraptor is here. Those are smaller animals, not huge, not tiny. They are more, I would call them vanilla theropods. Just so you know, there are groups that are genetically still common ancestors to the other two groups. They are still present, but in this case, even though we still have Coelurosaurs alive, there are two very distinct branches of Coelurosaurs that have diversified a lot, so they get their own focus in those presentations. Now, this is going to be the interesting bit. We have this part of the tree here that still needs filling in. So I will show you guys a picture. This is made by Rebecca Dart, one of my favorite paleo artists also. And looking at this, does someone want to guess what this dinosaur is? I will give the Twitch chat just a second, and I will have a drink of water. Let's see if there's someone brave enough to warrant a guess. Trinex, you are actually pretty close. It's a little too early for a Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus is a late Cretaceous dinosaur, but this is the origin of the group that Spinosaurus belongs to. Look alike, closer, but also the same group. So a good guess from both of you. The animal is called Baryonyx. Baryonyx is one of the earliest members of the group called Spinosauria. And what Spinosaurians are dinosaurs adapted to semi-aquatic environments, to coastal zones. They are avid fish eaters. And here's a zoom in on one of them, just exploring the coast, seeing if anything interesting washed up, which in this case, it found a beached carcass of a plesiosaur. And Baryonyx belongs to one of two groups in Spinosauria, which are named after Baryonyx itself. So Baryonychinae, it's a bit of a handful name. So they are Spinosaurs without the crest. Some of you might know Spinosaurus from this very big crest on its back. Baryonychines, oh my god, they don't have that. I want to show you a few pictures of Baryonyx and then talk about the group in a little more detail. Like I said, I promise there will be a lot about meat-eating dinosaurs, and we are going to go through almost all of them. So Baryonyx, about this size, we see that's a sizable animal, but again, most of the stuff it ate were the fish. And Baryonychinae means heavy claws, and for a reason. So first, about the diet. Those were mostly fish-eating dinosaurs, but we also found bones of small herbivores in the stomachs of their skeletons. What we don't know is were they scavenged or did they actually actively prey on those animals as well. However, based on the fossil record, the bulk of their diet were fish. The term is piscivorous. The snout, the mouth, you saw that the mouth was a little long. It's actually a little similar to the snout we see in crocodiles and crocodilians. It's an example of, again, a term that I will keep using, convergent evolution, which is if there is an adaptation that is effective for a certain lifestyle, in this case, a semi-aquatic lifestyle, it is going to occur in multiple groups of animals. The long, flat snout, narrow mouth emerged in crocodilians, and it emerged in Baryonychinae dinosaurs. That dent that you can see here, very visible in Baryonyx, but also in some crocodiles, is used to trap a slippery fish and make it harder for it to escape once the animal has bitten down. They also had claws. And unlike raptors, those huge claws were not on the feet, they were in the arms, right? So Baryonyx had this massive claw that it could have possibly used to impale fish, but it might have also been useful in scavenging. If it was indeed a scavenger of land animals, it might have used that to dismember the animal and dig into the carcass. They had aquatic habits, but were not active swimmers. Nothing in the body anatomy indicates that they would have been able to do that. The chemistry, because we can actually analyze the chemistry of the fossils to determine the lifestyle of the animal, the chemistry indicates that they did engage in semi-aquatic lifestyle. They probably waded in water, maybe a little bit like hippos do nowadays. But again, they were not active swimmers, and they had less of an aquatic lifestyle than this other branch where the actual Spinosaurus belonged to. We'll talk about it in a moment. So those are the Baryonychines. A few more pictures. This is a picture by Jonathan Kua, inspired by the image of bears standing on top of a waterfall waiting for a fish to jump up, which I don't think it's a stretch because, again, convergent evolution is a thing. in the natural world. And just as some anatomical features occur multiple times, so do behaviors, most likely. So why the hell not? Maybe baryonyx would stand at the top of the waterfall and wait for fish to jump up and capture them. A different idea is maybe they ate fish like we do popcorn, when we throw it up and try to open our mouths and wait for it to fall in. Here is an image of baryonyx catching a shark. You might remember the shark, Hybodus, a spiky shark. And this is just a few tips if you ever wanted to adopt one. So remember to clean its teeth, the stuff gets stuck in between them, and remember to keep a safe distance from the claws that you see here. And a reminder, please always empty your pool. It really attracts wild animals and is generally not a good thing, because then dogs go missing. One more picture that I really like. Artists really like portraying baryonyx in urban environments for some reason. So here is one more beautiful picture of it in a dystopian future where the city was flooded and a baryonyx is just chilling. Baryonyx is not the only representative of this group. There are many others, like Camarilla-saurus, for example. I don't know if it's a World of Darkness reference or not, but that's how it's called. This is a smaller one. There are others here. I think this is also R.J. Palmer. I'm not sure. Those are two baryonychins found in UK, Ceratosukos and Riparo venator. The size is like this. This is my favorite size measure, which is 1 Lebron. They are a few Lebrons long, all in all. Here is a different take on one of them, Ceratosukos. Again, what is probably worth mentioning is it's not only fish they ate. If there was a small aquatic animal like a turtle, they would have eaten that too, of course. So, you saw that in Spinosaurids we had this group, and there is the other group, right? So, so there is a question. Why the extra skin? Is that what you mean here? The thing is that the paleo art of old had a habit of so-called shrink wrapping, which is that the animals were made way skinnier than they actually are, which is something that the paleo artists are trying to correct now. So a lot of living dinosaurs, which are birds, have a lot of loose skin on them. And we do have some fossils with fossilized skin, which indicate that it might have been a little bit looser in some animals. So while this is to a degree speculative, it is possible that there was a little more skin there than what we are used to in some older reconstructions. Okay, guys, going back to this big chart, we have this one more branch to fill in, the second group of Spinosaurids. It is represented by Valibona venatrix. Oh my God, I totally pronounced it correctly. And you can see already there is a crest, right? It's a smaller crest. It's not like in the Spinosaurus that you might have seen in Jurassic Park, because this is early on. Here it's even more conservative in this image, but this group will develop those crests, and we have it represented here. Over time, they will develop a much more aquatic lifestyle than baryonychins. They will not be quite just aquatic dinosaurs, but they will get closer to actually preferring to stay in the water. So, speaking of fossils that are difficult to identify, you might remember this drawing from 2 weeks ago. Suchosaurus might have been a common ancestor of those two groups, so-called a basal representative of Spinosaurids. We just don't know for sure. Other Spinosaurians, this is also valuable venat, and I forgot how it's called. The one with the long name starting with V. Again, in this case, a bit of a shorter crest and a bit of a different representation of it screaming at the sun, I guess. So, this was a bunch of those big ones. We have one more group here. In the future, this group, Ceratosauria, will focus on it way more. I will show just one representative of it. It's called Spectrovenator. You can see it's a smaller animal. You can see, although, again, those characteristic very short arms. What is also unique to them is that they have fairly short mouths. Not this early on, because it's still early for their family, but the snout will get way shorter. I call them the bulldog theropods. So while Spinosaurids, they have these super long mouths, those guys have them way shorter. Here's a different image of it. You can see those body proportions. You can see those weird arms, and yes, they are pointed in the correct direction. This group had them pointing backwards. I call them sometimes the Naruto runners of the dinosaur family. So, those are the big theropods. Like I said, about 50 slides about the big meat eaters, but the family Theropoda has some subgroups in it. We have Maniraptoromorphs, which are where generally the smaller theropods are present. And I want to talk about a few of them now. So here are Compsognathids. You might remember Compsognathus from Jurassic Park, a small dinosaur. Here you have two different fossils that we have, and that roughly show how big it is. This is not as little as they got. For the record, Compsognathus no longer are alive in the early Cretaceous. It was a late Jurassic animal. But the family Compsognathids is still alive, and we'll talk about some other representatives. This is Shunmenlong, a Chinese Compsognathid. You can see the size comparison. It is one of the smallest. You can see a comparison here with a mouse and to a human's foot. They were predators. They would probably eat very small rodents and some insects. And Trinex, yes, Compsognathus no longer alive. Spoiler alert. On the other end of the spectrum, not all Compsognathids were small. Sinocalliopteryx is, as far as I'm aware, the largest Compsognatid around. So as you can see, a little bigger, quite fluffy, really cool animal. A different drawing. Both of those, I believe, done by Gabriel Gueto. Again, a flex drawing made with a pencil and not Photoshop. And again, Gabriel Gueto. Just a zoom in on the face. A bit of a different take here. A little less fuzzy, a little less cute. I guess hunting some flying dinosaurs. I'm using this word flying dinosaurs very specifically. Those are not birds. This is not a true bird. We'll talk about a little more about that going forward. Going back to this family tree of Maniraptoromorphs, there are other groups here. The one I want to talk about now is Ornithomimosaurs. We introduced them last time, and they are slowly diversifying here. So as a reminder, those are the fast-running theropods that were most likely omnivorous, meaning they ate both vegetables and meat, and they had adaptations that made them, at least in the body shape terms, similar to modern-day ostriches. Again, you see some flying stuff next to them, not true birds as much as they might look like. Another ornithomimosaurid is Cinnarimimus. You can see the size comparison here. I love this art of it. The artist is Brian Eng. He has I would say, a slowly dying out approach to art, which is a lot of paleo artists, rightfully, try to portray dinosaurs as not just vicious, angry animals. And Brian Eng, he does that too, but he also makes some fairly brutal paleo art to still show that those were, yes, animals, not monsters, but they still had a savage side to them. You will see some of his art in those presentations. Another group here is Therizinosaurs. Those are the actually herbivorous Maniraptoromorphs, so they ate plants, and you can see those big claws at the forearms. Those claws will get way, way bigger going forward. This is still early for their family, and this is a characteristic of this group. Therizinosaurs would develop long necks and long shoulder claws. Another representative of the family is Liguanosaurus. You can see it here. Not very big. You can see it compared here to a cat. In general, not a usual member of the family. Most of them get way bigger. In fact, the largest members of this family are way bigger than Tyrannosaurus rex. And a different visualization of the same animal. Here, an interesting take with quills among the feathers. Not actually certain whether the quills were present. Now, let me talk about a different group that I didn't talk about last time. One of my favorite groups of maniraptoromorphs are so-called Alvarezsauroids. So here is a representative from the late Jurassic. This is when this group initially emerged, and this is Haplochaerus. And what is interesting about Haplochaerus is that it's the earliest member of a group that was likely a group of dedicated insect eaters among theropods. So Alvarezsauroids, most likely insect-eating dinosaurs that use their claws to dig insects out of termite mounds, out of the tree bark and all that. This one lived in the late Jurassic. Representative in the early Cretaceous, where we are right now, is Tugulosaurus, not very small, but I want to show you where this group is headed. Ultimately, by the end of the Cretaceous, by the end of the age of dinosaurs, they will look like this. This is Mononychus at the end of the Cretaceous. And what I want to draw your attention to is the arms. They have a single claw in there. So Tyrannosaurus rex had two. Those guys have one, most likely dedicated insect eaters that would just dig insects out of a mound like this. This is the future. Currently, where we are in the timeline, we have the Tugulosaurus representing still three claws, not one. Another group is this. I'm going to light up all of it here, although in the Hauterivian and Barremian, where we are right now, we have actually very few representatives of it. This is the very beginning for this group. So we have one of them right here at this longer branch, so what you could call a common ancestor to the rest of them. It's called Calamospondylus. And you can see that the snout is a little shorter, and what you see here is flight feathers. So this is what I told you about. This is a group that is not on the same evolutionary line as birds, but has flight feathers confirmed. They did not fly, mind you. In part 4 of those presentations, I will explain what those feathers were used for instead, but they had the flight feathers present. The group is called Oviraptorosauria, and as the name implies, it will lead to the animal called Oviraptor. You might have heard about Oviraptor as being the egg thief. By the way, complete character assault. They did not steal eggs. They were actually very social animals that lived in big family groups. But we'll talk about them in the future. Let's move on to the big pop culture stars, the Deinonychosaurs. In Deinonychosauria, you had them introduced 2 weeks ago. We have so-called dromaeosaurs. Dromaeosaurs are what you would consider true raptors, right? And here is the one that I introduced you 2 weeks ago, Utahraptor. Utahraptor, most of its presence is actually in Hauterivian and Barremian, and not in the time periods which we discussed 2 weeks ago. This is where most of the species presence is in the fossil record. As a reminder, Utahraptor, the largest dromaeosaur we know of. So raptors generally don't get quite as big as this one. The other ones that live here is, for example, on this branch. So the group that is basal to the rest of this tree. We use this term basal. So we have a tree, and here is its base, right? So basal to all dromaeosaurs. We have Shanag, for example, way smaller, as you can see here. And we have Ornithodesmus, again, a smaller raptor. So the size variation was already quite significant at this time. And in between them, in this part of the family tree, we have Vectiraptor. This is actually a very recent discovery. Again, beautiful art by Gabriel Ugueto and some Victorian gentleman right next to it. Now, let's look here. I mentioned Troodontids briefly 2 weeks ago. As a reminder, they are smaller Deinonychosaurs, but at least in terms of body proportions, their brain is the biggest of all dinosaurs relative to the body size. So there are actually ideas that they were the smartest dinosaurs because of that. One that we have present here is Meilong, a dinosaur found in China. You can see that the size comparison here shows it's tiny. One thing that needs to be pointed out is that this is a juvenile specimen, right? So this is the specimen we have. It would have likely grown bigger, maybe to like this size. This is also something that we call a holotype. Holotype is the first specimen of a group of dinosaurs, of a species. So whenever a new Meilong fossil will be discovered and the scientists want to decide whether this is indeed Meilong, they will compare it to this skeleton to it. And Meilong is a fairly popular dinosaur among paleo artists, and what you can see here is that it is represented in the same pose everywhere, because this is the pose that the fossil was found in. The juvenile that the fossil was found of most likely fell asleep due to some illness and never woke up. A little sad, but we do have a beautiful fossil to look at thanks to that. Now, we talked a lot about land animals. I would like to take you under the waves now. So in the Hotterivian and Barremian, we have a lot of interesting aquatic animals. And we have some that you would recognize today, like Cretaceous is a shark that is more of a bottom-dwelling animal. There are some other ones that are a little more unusual, like the Protospinax. You can see here a beautiful fossil on the left with those like white fins, really cool animal. We have fish, here represented by Colodus and Tapexictes. They actually belong to the same group, which I can't remember its name right now. But what is interesting is that this group actually develops piranha-like adaptations before the piranhas. So by the time of the late Cretaceous, there are actually very sharp-toothed fish swimming around in the oceans and rivers in the late Cretaceous. There are also a lot of ammonites. There is no good art of them, but they're amazing fossils. And what is characteristic for ammonites in the Hotterivian and Barremian is that a lot of them have spikes. As you can see here, and there are some other really amazing fossils of ammonites. You can see this one was very meticulously cleaned up by the paleontologist that was, chipping away at it in a workshop to discover all this detail that you can see. What I want to talk about now is I want to give you a reminder of the terminology that we use for the slices of time. And I will explain in a minute how this talk about ammonites ties into it. So, as a reminder, we are right now in the Mesozoic era, right? The Mesozoic era is the slice of time that Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous are in. In general, Mesozoic era is what we call the time of dinosaurs. One of those three subdivisions in the Mesozoic era is called a period. So we have a Cretaceous period. Then the subject of all those five streams is an epoch, right? We are focusing on the lower Cretaceous epoch. And as we are moving through time, we are looking at so-called ages or stages. So Hotterivian and Barremian are ages. There actually exists a subdivision of this time. It's called a biozone. And we'll use Hotterivian as an example. So you can see we have Hotterivian here, and we have subdivisions. And those subdivisions are actually names of species of ammonites. And here is the deal. Ammonites are super common and super abundant in the fossil record. So common, in fact, that they are what we call an index fossil. We use them and their abundance to identify what slice of time we are in right now while we're exploring some rocks. So Radiatus is a subdivision where this species of ammonite is present all over the world in the rock. So just so you know, you can go deeper, and ammonites are the key. Now, staying on the subject of the watery environments. This is one of the other fish present in freshwater environments in this case. Again, Brian Eng, he likes to show the more vicious side of the animals. You can see it in the teeth of this fish. Cladocyclus is a very toothy boy. You can see the size comparison to a human here. And I think this one portrays it a little bit better because you have a person's arm outstretched here and this whole body. You would probably not want to be bitten by this one. And a beautiful illustration. It looks like it's alive, but this is actually just art of the same fish. Now, I believe I promised you a bemused ichthyosaur. This is the one. As a reminder, this is not a fish. This is not a mammal. This is not a dolphin. It's a reptile. It's a reptile belonging to the group ichthyosaurs, and Platypterygius is just one of them. This is actually one of the biggest ichthyosaurs of this era. You can see it's about 7 meters long. And what is characteristic for Platypterygius and its close relatives is this very long snout that, I don't know, maybe it's used to dig for animals in sediment or something else. I'm not quite sure. But there are a lot of other ichthyosaurs living in this time. A little smaller, average size of those three species is 3 meters. Just so you know, they're actually very abundant animals in the oceans, but they are not apex predators. They have filled the niche of a smaller predator in its aquatic environment. One of the more interesting ones is Moiscasaurus. It's a small detail, but a funky one, which is that it has 2 pairs of nostrils, on each side. And we have, oh my God, I'll try to read it, Myobrachypterygius here. And it's a good thing to remind ourselves that those animals are not always big, that they actually need to grow over their lifespan. So you can see that ichthyosaurs, depending on their age, would have been of a different size here compared to a human being. Now, moving past ichthyosaurs, let's look at the actual apex predators of this era. In plesiosaurs, we have 2 main groups, as we discussed 2 weeks ago. We have the long-necked ones here at the bottom, and we have the short-necked animals. The short-necked, called pliosaurs, are the apex predators, and we will talk about some of them now. This is Sachicasaurus. If you ask me, the eye, which looks a little bit human, is what makes it super freaking creepy. In this picture, beautiful 3D rendition. This is a big animal. It's 10 meters long. You can see a human next to it. It's a head that could swallow you twice if you stood straight in it. Those are at the top of the food chain in the ocean. So Carcharodontosaurs of this era rule the land. Pliosaurs rule the oceans. That said, not all pliosaurs are the apex predators, and not all pliosaurs look the same. Luscan is a very different pliosaur. Again, you see this weird adaptation with a long snout present in this one, about 6 to 7 meters long. Also a predator, but this one probably more adapted to just catching medium-sized fish. What is interesting about it is the teeth at the top of the snout here. You can see them a little bit better in this reconstruction by Joshua Nupe. The teeth would, like in some species of the pig today, they would pierce through the skin and be visible through the snout. I don't know if there was any benefit to that, if there is a reason why they adapted like this, but that is how they looked like. And here is a skull so that you can see how big the head was next to a human being. And here is a different species, a more standard pliosaur, so a big stocky head, long fins, short neck, Acostasaurus. Not as big as Sachicasaurus, but also one that would take an apex predator niche, maybe in a more shallow sea, where Sachicasaurus would not be that present. We have Stenorhynchosaurus, another one. They are very abundant in the oceans of this time. Here's the head, again, a sizable animal. And the fact that there are so many species living alongside one another of this one group shows how dominant they were. Now, let's take a look at this other group. So those are the long-necked plesiosaurs. We were talking about pliosaurs, and here are the plesiosaurs. Plesiosaurs are, again, not apex predators. They eat the fish, they eat the squid. And what is interesting is that their fossils show signs of a decompression sickness, which might point to the fact that they were probably very deep divers. So just as we have whales diving deep nowadays, we would probably have plesiosaurs dive deep at this time, which is why this animal's name is Abyssosaurus. It has some very cute art I will show in a moment, about 5 meters long, so not very big. And here is one just checking on you in the middle of the night to see if you are doing okay. Another species of a plesiosaur is Lagina nectis. Here the artist is visualizing how it might have tried to catch fish in a big school of fish. I have a question: could I please comment on their way of swimming? I could. So for those long-necked plesiosaurs, they were probably not very rapid swimmers, but they were probably good at maneuvering their bodies due to having those 4 long fins. They would not accelerate rapidly. And what is interesting is this neck was actually not very flexible. It was actually fairly rigid. It was rigid because it was used like a rudder. You can see that the tail is very small here at the end of the body, and it was not used to give the animal direction. It was actually the neck in front of the animal that was used to cut through the water and help it gain direction. They were probably more of ambush predators than pursuit predators. On the other hand, the pliosaurs, so the ones that were the apex predators with the big heads, those were probably capable of achieving higher speeds and faster. They had really big front flippers, and they were probably able to pursue their prey for a longer period of time. So Lagina nectis is represented here. You can see roughly its size next to a human. And on the left, you can see also an adaptation for a deeper lifestyle in the darker waters where not much sunlight reaches. You can also see very long teeth, which is characteristic for animals that are adapted to catching fish. Just as you saw in the baryonyx on the land, right? There were also long teeth because it is not easy to hold a fish in your mouth. I don't know if you guys ever tried to do that. It is not an easy trick. A different plesiosaur, Juca, which I believe was an Arctic plesiosaur. They did not actually have to live only in tropical waters. And this one. This is also a plesiosaur. But as you can see, this one has a short neck. And this is not a mistake. This is not one of those big, short-necked apex predators. This one is on the side of the family where the long-necked ones are. But some of them actually adopted a freshwater lifestyle, and in the course of doing that, for some reason, their necks started getting shorter. So one branch of their family looked like this, and they're actually way smaller. You can see Leptocleides here next to a person. Here's a different visualization of it. I think maybe a little bit better. You can see the neck is a little shorter, but the head is still small. The pliosaurs, the big ones, had a massive head, and those, even though the neck got shorter, the head stayed relatively short. And I told you I would tell you what the Neovenator here was eating, this is Leptocleides. So again, a freshwater plesiosaur that just happened to have been caught by a land dinosaur. Here are two very interesting scenes that I really like. You can see Leptocleides swimming in coastal waters, in this case, next to a shark, and using the shark's rough skin to scratch itself, which is actually a behavior we see in modern animals. There are a lot of animals in the ocean which use sharks as their own personal scratching post. And on the right here, we see an adaptation of a seal behavior with the Leptocleides, which is just jumping out backwards, flipping to just have fun, which I think both are very nice inspirations for this. Now, another group of aquatic animals, Thalattosuchians. I told you about them 2 weeks ago. They are a side branch of crocodiliforms. So crocodiliforms, as the name implies, will eventually lead to crocodiles, but this branch is a side evolutionary experiment. So they were crocodiliforms uniquely adapted for aquatic lifestyle. I say that in the past tense because this is actually the end of them. In the Hotterivian, they go extinct and are no more. However, this doesn't mean that crocodiliforms are doing bad. On the contrary, one of the branches, called the Metasuchia, which is actually a branch that will lead to true crocodiles, is doing so well that they're actually eating land dinosaurs. This is Sarcosuchus. It is one of the largest crocodiliforms ever. This is where it lives, and we find its fossils with lots of bones of actually sizable theropods. To give an idea of the size, you can look here. It is illustrated in purple right here next to a person, and just so you have an idea how big our crocodiles get. In the green, you have what is, I believe, Australian saltwater crocodile, because of course the biggest living crocodile would be from Australia, right? So Sarcosuchus is a bit bigger than it. It is not the biggest crocodiliform ever. I know of at least 4 that are bigger, and we'll talk about some of them later in the Cretaceous. Here are some extra pictures, are like the one by Rothman on the right, which is, we have a behavior that we know today, a herd of herbivores sitting on the coast on the shore of some river, and just Sarcosuchus coming in to say hi, grab one, drag it under the water to eat it. That said, not all crocodiliforms were big. Here you have one on the smaller end of the spectrum, Compyodontosuchus. I am so annoyed by this S for some reason being moved. A bit of an issue with resolution, I guess. As you can see, way smaller animal. You can see it here, chilling in the water, hoping it will not be eaten by a dinosaur. Another one is this one, Antiophthalmosuchus. I totally know how to pronounce that. About 1.5 meters long, but could eat some small dinosaurs. Another one, Bernisartia. This is actually a picture from the late Jurassic. Bernisartia was already alive there as a species, but is still present in the early Cretaceous. It is a small crocodiliform. As you can see, here are some small fish next to it. Now, let's go back to dinosaurs. Let's talk about the big dinosaurs, the sauropods. I told you last time that most sauropods have a problem, which is that they are going extinct. You can see that the time of their temporal range, they all go extinct before the hit of the asteroid, except for this group. And we will be slowly saying goodbye to all of them as we go through time here. Starting with Camarasaurids. Here we have a fossil of some teeth of an animal called Oplosaurus. Unfortunately, it's not a very popular animal among paleo artists, so we only have a size comparison. So to give you an idea and a reminder how Camarasaurs looked like, we'll use Camarasaurus itself. There were medium-sized sauropods with short mouths. You can see it represented here, and this is the end for them. Camarasaurs are no longer alive after this time period. And they are not the only ones going extinct here. Another group is Turiasauria, which is the group of sauropods I call the vanilla sauropods. They are kind of, just what you imagine when you think about a sauropod. What is interesting about them is more the thing on the inside. Here you can see the neck. You can see those very long spikes inside of it. This is characteristic for their group, but you cannot see this on the outside. But they too are gone at this point. This is an important thing to point out, which is in the Jurassic, dinosaurs diversified because there were a lot of empty niches for them to expand into. In the Cretaceous, they already start having dominated the whole world, which means that they compete against one another, which means that some of the groups of dinosaurs need to go extinct for when the others are starting to dominate the environment. Now, you saw which of those are slowly going extinct. Let's look at the group that is actually doing quite well, which are the titanosaurs. And we'll start with Volga Titan. which is, I think in the, well, okay, Ben probably knows where Volga is located. I bloody forgot. It is in Eastern Europe. So Volga Titan, a big sauropod. You can see its comparison with the human here. I think what is interesting to point out here is those bony things on its back, which is the titanosaurs are sauropods with armor. The armor is present only in this group. It's not just ankylosaurs that had armor. Those guys have them too. And Volga Titan has a little bit of it. It's not as dense of a bony protection as ankylosaurs have, but they have it present in this group as well. Another one is Malawisaurus, an animal from Africa. You can see the size here. It's not as big as some of the other ones, but also has those bony protrusions present on it. This one is really neat because it has a very short snout. And what I told you that some dinosaur groups are replacing others, this is one example, because we see that Camarasaurs, which also have short faces, are going extinct. And right away there is another group of titanosaurs with short faces that is rising to replace them in the environment, because this short face is clearly an adaptation that is useful in some capacity. I would say that Malawisaurus doesn't have a lot of art, which is why I showed a toy here, which is actually a very good toy. It is very accurate. That is used by some people online to take really cool pictures, which I really like this one by Paul Carter. Here you have a good fossil to show how short the head of it actually was, and I think a better size comparison of a guy standing in front of it. Now, we have the two titanosaurs here. This is only the beginning of diversification for this group of sauropods. There will be way more of them introduced as the basal sauropods go extinct and those diversify to replace them. What I want to show you now is more of a puzzle. What you're looking at is a ton of footprints left by sauropods. And one of those footprints is big. This footprint has been called Braviparopus. So they have assigned it to a species that we don't have bones for because it's so unique. It's unique because of its size. And now, so we don't get overexcited, big claims require big evidence, but depending on what type of a sauropod would have left this footprint, it might actually be the biggest land animal ever. Some upper estimates of Braviparopus are like this. So it would have been about 40 meters long and 25 meters tall. Again, we have no bones to correlate to this footprint, and we need to be careful about making tall claims about a massive size of an animal, but Braviparopus certainly is one of the candidates for the title of the biggest animal on land ever. Let's talk about other dinosaurs. Ornithischians, my favorite of the three main groups. This is where we have the armored dinosaurs, the dinosaurs with horns and spikes. First, the armored dinosaurs, ankylosaurs. One of the subfamilies, nodosaurs, are the ankylosaurs without the mace, right? So there is no mace at the tail, but what they do have is really cool shoulder spikes. Here you have Polacanthus, not a very big dinosaur, but depending on the reconstruction, the spikes are freaking massive. And this is not the animal that you'd want to try approach from the back, chase after it, and try to bite its neck. They were very difficult to hunt by the predators of this era. Depending on the species, because there are a few species of Polacanthus belonging to the same genus, the size of spikes could have varied. The other one was Gastonia. Again, no mace, but massive shoulder spikes. As you can see here, depending on the reconstruction, they could have grown gigantic. At the base of Ankylosauria, we have common ancestors of those two groups, right? The other group we will talk about in the future, but the ones that are genetically or cladistically, if you want to use fancy words, ancestral to the two of them are here. And one of them is called Minmi. A cute name for a cute small ankylosaur, very fitting one. As far as I'm aware, they're actually the smallest ankylosaurian species known to science. Now, let's talk about stegosaurs, which, as you can see, are close relatives to ankylosaurs. Two groups, Huangosaurids, are stegosaurs that had way more spikes than plates and had those shoulder spikes. And this Paranthrodon is actually the last huangosaurid. It's only that other group that is, survives beyond this. So again, we are slowly having this exchange. And you see it makes sense because, again, huangosaurids have those shoulder spikes, as do the nodosaurs. So nodosaurs emerge, they improve on the shoulder spike adaptation, and they outcompete huangosaurids. So they are no more. Now, let's look at something else. Here we have this branch. They are very like vanilla dinosaurs, I would call them. So they are small, two-legged, herbivorous ornithischians, Jeholosaurids. Here is something really cool, and it's more video gamey. This is Hypsilophodon, as it is represented in The Isle, the video game. This is a speculative reconstruction, especially the tail, but it is not an impossible one. Like the dinosaurs might have sported really cool feather ornaments on them. Hypsilophodon is a small animal, herbivorous one, probably not as fancy as represented in the game, but really beautiful representation, I think. Probably a little more modest, looking like this, quite feathered, depending on how you reconstruct it, more or less colorful. And here, obviously, a representation of the Victorian elites using one of them to just flex their wealth. And another artistic interpretation based on the reconstruction done by the artists working on the Isle. And this, one of my favorite pictures of it by Grosenthal. You can see the mother here, the head, just cuddling two chicks, which is probably how it would have looked like. I think it's super cute. Now, we have one more group to talk about here, which are ceratopsians. As a reminder, ceratopsia is the group which will lead to Triceratops, but not yet. As you might remember last time, they are fairly small here, a little bit bigger than the cat, no big horns, mostly walking on two legs at this time. There are a few of them that I want to show you here. Depending on how deep you go into this family tree, they're actually looking quite similar. You have Liaoceratops here, which actually does have some horn action going on here on its cheeks, but in general, there are no big horns. What is there, however, are quills on the tail. So this would have been pretty freaking spiky. And two more visualizations of the same animal. Sorry, I almost forgot there's one more group here, ornithopods. So ornithopods are the duck-billed dinosaurs. You might remember I talked a little bit about them and Iguanodon last time. This is how this family is represented. At the very base of the tree, right, so ancestral to all the others, we have one that is looking like this. Sorry, I have screwed up the animations a little bit. Changmiania. And I really like this one because one, it's small, and second, it's a great example of a burrowing dinosaur. So some dinosaurs were actually dedicated burrowers and lived, or at least nested, underground. This art is by Julio Lacerda, who is really good at turning 3D renders into 2D art like this. And I think an important thing to point out here is that dinosaurs were not, this is not called the era of dinosaurs because they were just big apex predators. It's called the dinosaur era because they were present in all the niches, even such small niche as just a burrowing animal. Next, how can we tell that they burrowed? Yes, the scientists are actually, depending on how good the fossil is, they're actually able to determine that the rock around a fossil comes from a collapsed barrel, for example, which was the case in the case of this animal. All right. The other group we have here is called Styracosterna. There are tons of them. This is a thing that I want to highlight, which is those are basically the cows of the Cretaceous. They are super common. There is a lot of variation among them, mostly herbivorous animals that are not competing with sauropods. They are focused on the medium height vegetation. We have one that is very interesting here. Mantellisaurus is an animal that we used to confuse for Iguanodon. Then it was later decided that no, this is actually its own species. What you can see is that the further right we move in the family tree of those animals, the longer the snout gets. This is an adaptation that will eventually lead to this shape of the mouth that looks a little bit like a duck beak but it's still in the process of evolving at this stage. What you can see here is the skeleton of the animal on the right side and a tooth on the left side, which at a glance might look a little bit like a predator's tooth, but it's not. It is very much an herbivorous tooth. They actually were the first dinosaurs that kind of had a mechanism that is a little bit like chewing. No dinosaurs actually chew, they just rip and tear, even herbivores, except for ornithopods. The thing, though, is that they didn't actually move their lower jaw the way we do when we chew something. It's just that teeth were interacting in a way that imitated chewing and could actually process the food in the mouth by just moving the jaw up and down. One of the interesting hadrosauriforms is Morellodon. This is one of the herbivorous dinosaurs with a crest on its back. Again, possible adaptation is thermoregulation or possibly display. Speaking of long snouts, I told you that the deeper we go into this family tree, the longer those snouts get. Brightstonius is a very recent discovery from UK and one of the longest snouts relative to the body size in the dinosaur family. We have an emergence of another group here represented by those two animals. I will not focus on too much detail with them because I would rather leave this detail for when we talk about Iguanodon. They are called hadrosauroids. In general, hadrosauriforms, hadrosauroids, they are slowly moving us in the right direction here to true hadrosaurs, which are what you guys probably know as the duck-billed dinosaurs. And we have Portalasaurus representing here. Now, on this branch, we have the man, the legend, the Iguanodon. But the Iguanodon actually appears at the very end of the time period that we are talking about today. I will not focus on it today. Instead, we will give Iguanodon a very deep focus in the fourth part of this series, at the time where it is more present in the fossil record. So this is just a teaser. FYI, guys, we will talk about Iguanodon in a lot of detail in part 4. Instead, now that we are done talking about dinosaurs for today, because those were all dinosaurs, I want to focus on something a little bit smaller, which are the things we find in amber, specifically amber from Lebanon. So we have Lebanese amber here, and there are some really freaking cool things there. We have wasps living in this time period already. We have a lot of other insects, unfortunately, present. Some details of the animals preserved in amber are just amazing. You can look and you can see the veins present in the wings of this fly, for example. Those boys are a little bit creepy, and there is actually a paleo art. There are some sort of a mite, I guess. It looks like something that you would pull out of freaking Dead Space or something. We also have a fossilized snail, a lot of really cool stuff. Well, I can't find the fossil of it. I believe one of the findings from the amber were actually the bones of a lizard called Weserpeton that you can see in this one. And speaking of small animals, moving past amber a little bit, we have freshwater fish like Belonostomus here. Not a big one, 30 centimeters. I want to show it because one, it looks kind of cool. I like its long snout. And second, the fossils of it are really amazing. There's a lot of detail, and there are a bunch of them. One of my favorite fossil animals, honestly. And, we are talking about all those super exotic animals, and we sometimes forget that animals we know today are present there already. You have your crabs, you have your frogs, you have your turtles, salamanders. All that stuff is already alive in the early Cretaceous and present in the environment. Speaking of insects, again, we have dragonflies. This is one of the best fossils of an insect ever. Most insect fossil record we actually get from amber. Not in this case. This is an actual dragonfly buried by what I believe was ashfall. Because what you need to know is that in this time period, there's a lot of volcanism action happening. And the detail on this one is amazing because ashfalls preserve fossils in incredible detail. Wrapping up slowly, I want to talk about us. Which are the mammals, right? Spinolestes is, as the name implies, a mammal with spines. Not an actual ancestor of the hedgehog. Again, an example of convergent evolution. Hello, Quack. I'm sorry you are here just for the end of it, but there is still some interesting stuff to talk about. But it is nice to have you. So spinolestes, head spikes, probably the same use as the hedgehog, but not closely related to the hedgehog at all. And to wrap up, a piece of art, again by Mark Witten, also a reconstruction of spinolestes, a beautiful one at that, I think really one of the best. Mammals, as you know, under the feet of dinosaurs. This is not their time. That will come way later, but they are present. Our ancestors are present here. Now, to wrap this up, here's this stuff, which is a lot of really cool flying animals. But I already talked for 1.5 hours, I believe, or close to, and I'm afraid that the fossil record for bird relatives, pterosaurs, and other flying things is so freaking good at this time period that it is impossible to talk about it in this stream. Instead, we will not talk about it today. We'll talk about it in 2 weeks in a stream dedicated just to flying animals, because there is just this much to talk about. I would say that with part 3, we're getting to the good part of those streams. I hope you like the first 2, but parts 3 to 5 are the part that I'm really proud of. So the Hotaravian and Barremian and the period right after it, called the Aptian, is, in terms of the fossil record, the best place in time for detailed information on the evolution of birds. Not true birds, mind you, their ancestors. But I do think that when it comes to pop culture, most of us are aware, hey, there was Archaeopteryx, there were some colorful like weird flying dinosaurs in the Jurassic, and then there were birds. And there is a ton of other stuff in the middle of it, and this middle is what we'll talk about in 2 weeks. We'll talk about what is and isn't a bird, because this is actually an interesting discussion in itself. But since we are talking about skies, we are not going to be talking only about the birds, because this is the Mesozoic, which is also, yes, the era of dinosaurs, but also the era of pterosaurs. So there will be a deep focus on them. We'll talk about their crests, how they hunted, their eggs, because this is actually a pretty interesting thing, how they flocked. We'll talk about chameleon pterosaurs, which is a bit of a teaser for next one. We'll talk about the origins of the bird beak, which, well, you can see the picture here, which is going to be a bit of an interesting story. And we'll talk about how all those flying animals interacted with each other. So the bird ancestors, the pterosaurs, and also flying raptors, which, yes, you read correctly, there were raptors that flew. And we will talk about them in 2 weeks. So I hope I will see you there for part 3 out of 5 of the early Cretaceous. And for today, thank you all for attending and coming to listen. Thank you for chatting. I hope you had fun. And this was me, I guess. I'm signing off for now, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.